She vanished from the family home one summer evening, and 3 years later the question still cuts straight through a small Tennessee community. Where is Summer Wells? If you follow this channel for ongoing coverage, hit subscribe and turn on the bell now so you'll get first-hand updates on this story and others the moment new information breaks. On June 15, 2021, 5-year-old Summer Wells was reported missing from the home she shared with her family in Hawkins County, Tennessee, a day that opened a long, frustrating chapter for investigators, neighbors, and the girl's relatives. That evening, an Amber Alert went out. Volunteers and officers flooded the rural landscape, and the search that followed drew national attention. The details of that first night, who called, who searched, what was seen, and what wasn't, set the tone for an investigation that has since been marked by sharp public interest and frustratingly few answers. The basic, verifiable fact remains. A little girl was last seen at her home on Ben Hill Road, and despite early and widespread efforts by law enforcement and the community, no conclusive evidence has ever identified where she went or what happened to her. Those opening hours and their immediate aftermath are still central because the timeline is where the case begins and where so much uncertainty lives. Witnesses reported different things. A neighbor thought they saw movement. Others recalled a truck in the area, and family members described actions and conversations whose timelines now conflict in crucial ways. From the beginning, that mixture of urgent searching and unclear recollection left investigators with a mountain of leads to sort through and very little that could be treated as settled fact. The Amber Alert and the media attention helped marshal resources, but they also ensured that speculation would spread quickly. Over the months and years that followed, the investigatory focus shifted between searching local terrain, analyzing phone records and tips, and trying to reconcile contradictory witness accounts, while Summer herself remained missing. For investigators, those first hours were doubly important because they are when the most recoverable physical evidence typically exists in missing child cases. Search teams deployed dogs, drones, volunteers, and specialized units. Properties were canvassed. Neighbors and passers-by were re-interviewed. But exhaustive, repeated searches have so far failed to produce a definitive piece of physical evidence that points to what happened or where Summer is now. No body has been found. No confirmed sighting has been reliably corroborated by investigators, and the hard forensic links that close many such investigations have been absent. That absence has left the case open and active, and has forced both law enforcement and family members into a long, public waiting game, one defined as much by the things we do not know as by the few facts we do. The case's earliest moments, the phone calls, the movements of people that night, the placement of vehicles, the presence or absence of other family members, continue to be parsed and repurposed by different storytellers. Small differences in timing or recollection matter when the question is whether a child walked away, was taken by a stranger, or encountered an accident. But the fog of contradictory memories, the passage of time, and the sheer quantity of leads investigators must check have made it hard to build a single, unbroken narrative. A missing child's case does not end after the first frantic days. It becomes an extended campaign of vetting tips, retesting leads, and keeping both institutional focus and public attention alive. That campaign is precisely what has unfolded in Hawkins County since June 15, 2021. Despite searches that have covered woods, yards, and rural byways, despite volunteers and law enforcement combing the landscape repeatedly, the investigation still lacks conclusive evidence or a confirmed sighting that would resolve the case. That absence has sustained unanswered questions, second guesses, and competing narratives about what happened to a little girl who vanished from her home on an ordinary evening. The search continues in the literal sense, with investigators still following tips and seeking any credible lead, and in the metaphorical sense, as the community and the family seek closure, truth, and the end of a terrible uncertainty. Don Wells, Summer's father, has consistently insisted that neither he nor Summer's mother, Candace Bly, harmed their daughter. In public statements and interviews, Don has pushed back against accusations and rumors that appeared on social media and in some corners of the internet, sometimes speaking with raw emotion about the toll the case has taken on him and his family. He has described the past years as a struggle against suspicion as much as a search for answers, and he has rejected insinuations tying him directly to Summer's disappearance. Those denials are a central part of the public story because, as family members, both he and Candace remain persons of intense interest to observers and, understandably, to investigators. Don's public profile has been complicated by incidents in his past that received media attention. Arrests, including a DUI stop, have been seized on by some commentators online as evidence or as fodder for speculation, even when investigators have not publicly linked those incidents to the disappearance. A prior arrest can shape public perception, but does not, by itself, prove culpability in a missing persons case. Yet perception matters. The family's name and the behavior of individuals connected to the story affect how the community talks about the case and how online narratives grow. That dynamic has made the Wells family both the subject of sympathy and, in other corners of the internet, the focus of suspicion. Don's insistence on his and Candace's innocence has two parallel effects. First, it keeps the focus on the need for verified evidence. He emphasizes that accusations without proof harm families and can distract investigators. Second, his public defense has not quieted the questions swirling online. For law enforcement, those denials are expected. They must be tested and weighed alongside other information. For the public, they are an emotional counterpoint. For skeptics, they can be treated as one more detail to be judged. Through it all, Don has continued to publicly call for whoever has Summer to come forward, framing his appeals with both anger and a father's fear, and urging the community to provide credible tips rather than rumor. Beyond denials and past arrests, Don and Candace have also described how difficult it has been to cope with the ongoing investigation. They have spoken about the emotional strain, the changes to family life, and the way that institutional processes, like child welfare interventions, have amplified trauma. The public exchanges, televised interviews, and social media echoes have produced an unrelenting spotlight that shapes the narrative in ways that are sometimes helpful for generating tips and sometimes harmful because they amplify unverified claims. As the parents maintain their stance, that insistence becomes a focal point for both empathy and scrutiny, and the tension between personal defense and public curiosity remains a central thread in the broader story. Don Wells has argued that failures by a range of agencies and individuals contributed to circumstances that left Summer vulnerable, a claim that touches on difficult, institutional questions about how missing child cases are handled and how families interact with multiple systems in crisis. Those assertions include criticisms of how some agencies communicated, how information was shared, and how child welfare interventions were executed. They also reflect intense personal anger and grief. While these are the father's perspectives and therefore subjective, they are not unusual in long, unresolved missing person cases where families feel sidelined. The debate over whether systems failed Summer and whether different actions could have produced a different outcome is part grief therapy, part public conversation about institutional responsibility. Recently, the parents said that the Tennessee Department of Children's Services has dropped cases related to the family, a development they welcomed and that has become part of the public record about how agencies engaged with them. Claims of systemic failure require careful parsing. Families often expect rapid coordination and full transparency from multiple agencies after a child goes missing. Investigators, in contrast, must follow protocol and protect legal processes. Don's assertions are rooted in lived experience. The grief of a missing child, the sense of being thwarted, and anger at opaque processes. Investigators will point to procedural reasons for certain steps: chain of custody, privacy protections, and the need to avoid tipping off potential suspects, and will caution that public expectations about immediate, full transparency can conflict with the careful, stepwise work of building a case. The interplay between a family's demand for answers and investigators' obligations to secure evidence is a recurring tension, and it helps explain why families sometimes feel agency responses are insufficient even when protocols are being followed. When investigators re-examine witness statements, what becomes clear is how easily conflicting accounts can complicate an inquiry. In this case, Different witnesses describe different sequences. A neighbor recalls a vehicle. A family friend recalls a window left open. An acquaintance remembers seeing an unfamiliar truck. Over time, as interviews are repeated and memory fades or shifts, it becomes harder to stitch together a single, coherent timeline. Investigators must weigh who saw what, when they saw it, how reliable their vantage points were, and how outside factors, light, distance, noise, might have affected perception. That process is painstaking. It requires corroboration through forensics, time-stamped digital records, or multiple independent witnesses, and without those anchors, conflicting memories can multiply rather than clarify. Every discrepancy matters because timelines are often the scaffolding that holds an investigation together. If a witness places Summer in a certain spot at a certain time, that detail can confirm or refute other accounts and guide searches. Conversely, if two witnesses give incompatible times for the same event, investigators must either reconcile them or mark the detail as unreliable. In the Wells case, those kinds of inconsistencies have slowed the establishment of a single accepted timeline, forcing authorities to treat many reported observations as leads rather than confirmed facts. That cautious approach is necessary to avoid misdirecting resources, but it can also create frustration among family members and the public who want decisive answers. Reconciling conflicting statements is slow, detail-oriented work, and when the public watches a case for years, patience is often in short supply. The problem of conflicting accounts also has a ripple effect. It drains time and attention. Investigators must interview people repeatedly, test alibis, compare phone records, and gather corroborating evidence. Meanwhile, each new contradictory account amplifies the number of directions a search might take, requiring scarce resources to be spread more thinly. That's why, in many missing person investigations, the first 48 to 72 hours are decisive, when witnesses' memories are freshest and physical evidence is most likely to be found. As time extends, memories blur, and conflicting statements can become entrenched in the public narrative, making it harder to identify which pieces are truly actionable. For the investigators working this case, navigating those murky waters remains both the technical challenge and the emotional grind. From the earliest days, social media has been both a tool and a hazard in Summerwell's case. Online communities have organized searches, spread flyers, and kept the story alive in places traditional news cycles might forget. At the same time, conspiracy theories, speculative videos, and unverified tips have proliferated in forums, Facebook groups, and across social platforms, shaping public perception in ways that have sometimes obstructed the investigation. Authorities warned early on that speculation was slowing the search and that unverified theories sent to tip lines could divert investigators from credible leads. That warning reflects a universal tension in modern missing person investigations. Social media's ability to mobilize attention is invaluable, but its tendency to amplify rumor can create noise that slows down the careful, evidence-based work investigators must do. Online speculation has taken many forms. Amateur sleuths producing lengthy theory videos, commenters proposing elaborate conspiracies, and casual observers repeating unverified facts that seem to fit a narrative. Some of that activity has helped generate leads. On occasion, social attention has been the catalyst for concrete information. But unchecked rumor also has real costs. It can clog official tip lines with duplicative or debunked accounts, place undue stress on families who must respond to wild accusations, and lead to the spread of misinformation that obstructs productive inquiry. In this case, family members and officials have repeatedly asked the public to prioritize verified information and to treat social speculation with skepticism. The public benefit of social media's attention must be balanced against the operational needs of investigators. At the same time that social media sparks rumor, it also creates space for vigilante investigation. Online amateur investigators sometimes identify and harass people who appear in videos or photos, or they suggest persons of interest based on tenuous connections. Those behaviors can intimidate witnesses, muddy relations between authorities and the community, and even put innocent people at risk. For families, that intensification of attention can be exhausting and harmful. The emotional labor of constantly rebutting falsehoods and defending privacy becomes an additional burden on top of grief, and it can complicate the investigative landscape. For law enforcement, the task is to solicit community help while discouraging damaging speculation, a delicate balance that is harder to maintain when every new rumor finds a megaphone online. Throughout this long search, investigative agencies have issued careful, limited public updates, statements that typically confirm only what they are prepared to release and that emphasize the ongoing nature of the inquiry. That cautious approach is standard for active investigations. Releasing too much can compromise tactics, endanger potential witnesses, or alert suspects. Agencies have periodically appeared on camera, issued press releases, and provided sound bites designed to keep the public informed without disclosing operational details. Those measured updates also reflect an investigative strategy. Preserve the integrity of work behind the scenes while asking the public for verified tips and observations. The effect of limited official updates is twofold. For investigators, control over public information is a deliberate tool, one that helps prevent compromising the case. For the community, however, the same discretion can feel like silence. When the public wants answers, short, carefully worded statements can be read as evasiveness, leaving suspicion and rumor to fill the vacuum. That is precisely what has happened here. Periodic, restrained statements from investigators have kept the case technically active while also fueling questions among those who want more detail. Investigators will say that this approach is necessary to preserve investigative options. Families and the public may interpret it as a lack of transparency. The tension between operational prudence and public demand for information has helped shape the case's public arc. As the investigation has stretched over years, several competing theories have taken root in public discussions. That Summer was abducted by a stranger, that she wandered away and suffered an accident, that foul play by someone known to the family was involved, or that some other unexpected circumstance explains her disappearance. Each theory has its own set of proponents and pieces of circumstantial evidence, and investigators continue to evaluate possibilities without publicly endorsing any single explanation. Agencies sometimes present the most plausible scenarios in controlled interviews to solicit public help. For example, discussing whether a child might have been taken by vehicle versus having walked away, but they are careful to label such statements as possibilities rather than conclusions. Abduction by an unknown person is a deeply feared scenario and one investigators take seriously. It fits with the issuance of an Amber Alert and the mobilization of resources. The walked away possibility, by contrast, is often raised when a child's last movements are unclear and there's little to suggest forcible removal. The theory that someone close to the child could be involved attracts intense public attention because it is intimate and sometimes suggested by contradictory accounts that appear in complex family situations. Each hypothesis carries different implications for where investigators look, which records they prioritize, and what questions they ask of the community. For now, investigative agencies continue to treat multiple theories as active lines of inquiry, seeking corroboration for anything that could point toward truth. Official discretion, conflicting public narratives, and persistent online rumor have created a vacuum that fuels suspicion in Hawkins County and beyond. When the official voice is quiet or cautious, public imagination rushes in. This dynamic has been especially powerful in this case because the story combines a small-town setting, a missing child, and a family whose private struggles have been made public. In the absence of definitive information, people fill gaps with stories that make sense to them. Theories about motive, conjectures about people's behavior, and guesses at the sequence of events. Those stories feel coherent compared to an unresolved fact pattern, and they can quickly ossify into accepted wisdom for groups that reinforce each other's views online. But they are not the same as facts. The more time passes without a confirmed explanation, the stronger both suspicion and speculation become, and the harder it is for investigators to keep the factual record clear. Even as rumors spread, the case remains officially open and unsolved, and law enforcement continues to ask the public for credible information. Investigators have urged anyone who remembers seeing anything unusual on the night of June 15th or who has verifiable information about Summer to come forward. Active tip lines and official channels are the paths that produce actionable leads. Photos with timestamps, vehicle descriptions, and independent witness observations are the kinds of details that investigators can pursue. The case's unresolved status means that every credible piece of information could still matter. The present truth is stark. Summer Wells has not been found, and the case remains an active, painful mystery. Authorities continue to vet leads and encourage anyone with meaningful information to reach out to official channels rather than circulate speculation online. Meanwhile, the family's plea for answers persists, as does the community's mixture of hope, frustration, and suspicion. The investigatory machinery continues to turn, carefully and deliberately, and the public's focused, credible engagement remains one of the best tools for producing results. In closing, this is a case where public narratives have repeatedly diverged from confirmed facts, where conflicting timelines have complicated the search, and where official information control has been a deliberate, if frustrating, investigative strategy. Unchecked rumor has proved dangerous to clear progress. Persistent, credible community involvement is essential to keep the case active and to offer any chance for resolution. The disappearance of Summer Wells is not only a mystery to be solved. It is a continuing human tragedy that depends on disciplined law enforcement work and responsible public participation. If you have information that could help, contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation or local authorities. And if you follow this channel, subscribe and turn on the bell to get verified updates as they become available. Thank you for staying focused on facts and for remembering that behind every headline, there are people who need answers.